So for the most of the country, one of the best moving baits out there is a swim bait. But if you happen to live below the Mason-Dixon line or someplace that has a lot of grass, you pretty much throw a swim bait out the window, because what takes the place of a swim bait is a swimming worm. Now there are a lot of different types of swimming worms, and one of the problems that people run into is they rig it just like a worm would be. But the key is you have to rig it like a swim bait would be, or else you end up with that swimming worm spiraling the entire way in. And if you've ever thrown one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So here today what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to rig a swimming worm so that your bait will not spin and you will catch the most amount of fish possible with the least amount of line twist that you can physically have. For today's video, to show you how to rig this, I'm going to be using a Z-Man Turbo Fatties. One of the other great swimming worms out there on the market is a Zoom Speed Worm. That's one that everybody knows and everybody throws. But for today's video, we're going to be rigging a Z-Man Turbo Fatties. So when you're rigging a swimming worm, the first thing you have to think about is, do you want to peg your weight? Because if you peg your weight, what's going to happen is, instead of that bait falling all together, if you don't peg your weight, it will fall separately. So it depends on how fast you want to fish it versus how slow you want to fish it. For me, I like to peg my weight because I like it all to move in sync. And so for this video, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to slide a bobber stop onto my Cortland Master braid. So you slide that on there. This is just an arc bobber stop. You can literally use any bobber stop out there on the market. Next is going to be your Texas rig weight. For this, it literally depends on how deep of water you're fishing. I had an 1/8 ounce laying out on the deck, so that's what I'm going to use. But another good option is going to be a 1/4, depending on the size worm you're fishing and how deep you're fishing. Next is the hook. There's a lot of different hooks that you can use out there on the market, but the one that I really like is your traditional offset worm hook. I don't like to use any of the EWG style hooks because they really make that worm spiral a little bit more, and these ones actually just help it position it better. And your hookup ratio is way better when you're reeling this worm in with a traditional offset worm hook than it would be with any other type of worm. So what we're going to do is we're going to tie this offset worm hook onto here just with a traditional San Diego jam knot. That's my favorite knot to go to with this. You can literally tie whatever knot you want, but this is one of the only knots that really does a good job at not burning on itself, and it really just doesn't waste a lot of fishing line. So we're going to tie that onto there just like so. Now we're going to cut the braid. We have everything where we need it to. Now comes the most important part when you are rigging this. When you look at a swimming worm and you look at it all together, the tail of a swimming worm looks kind of like a boot tail on this Z-Man worm. And there's a reason I use this Z-Man worm, is because it's really easy to understand what I'm talking about. A Z-Man worm has a traditional boot style on it, whereas when you're throwing a speed worm, it has just a cut tail in it. And so it's harder to understand what I'm talking about. But what you want to do is you want to rig the bottom of your hook in line with this swim bait tail. And so I'll show you exactly what I mean. What I'm trying to do is rig it just like I would rig a swim bait. So I want my hook to line up just like this. I want that hook to be perfectly in line with the bottom middle of that swim bait tail. And so I'm just going to line that up like so. Insert my hook. And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about here. So I T-expose that, and so you can see that the bottom of my hook is perfectly in line with the dead center of that swim bait tail. That's what's going to make it run perfectly flat like this and get that nice roll and that nice kick, but it's not going to let that bait spiral and twist your line all up. That's the key when it comes to rigging one of these swimming worms, because if you don't do that, it's really going to throw your bait off, and it's really not going to let those fish want to eat it, because they're going to see that bait spiraling and it's going to throw them for a loop just like it throws your reel for a loop. So keep that in mind when you're out there on the water, when you're rigging one of these swimming worms, and you will be 10 times better off and you will catch a lot more fish.